Postcards from Nebraska on RFD-TV, a program about rural life. This week, it's the farmer's lifeblood that falls from the sky. Roger takes a look at rain and how it makes or breaks lives. With the rain comes weeds, but don't be so quick to get out your hoe or your poison. There's plenty of good to be found in those pesky yard invaders. Mark Twain called it a good walk spoiled. But golfers in Dannebrog are mighty proud of their course. But don't expect Pebble Beach. Dannebrog is a place that really puts the country in country club. And finally, it's a spectacular event that happens like clockwork. We'll take in the sights and sounds of the Sandhill Cranes making their stop in the heartland on their journey between Texas and Canada. It's all this week on Postcards from Nebraska.
This is Nebraska Highway 14, north of Central City, Nebraska, just down the road there. And it's also the 98th meridian. Wright Morris, one of America's most celebrated novelists, spent his early years in Central City. And the first words of his novel, Works of Love, are west of the 98th meridian, where it sometimes rains and it sometimes doesn't. West of the 98th meridian, where it sometimes rains and it sometimes doesn't. That phrase defines the Great Plains pretty well, and it's that very feature of uncertainty in the weather that makes life out here what it is. Where it always rains, you learn how to deal with it, and you grow crops like rice. Where it rarely rains, you don't worry about drought because you understand it'll always be dry. What's tough is trying to live where it sometimes rains and it sometimes doesn't. Out here on the plains, we tend to snort and growl when we hear some city fellow referring to rain as bad weather. Often as not, rain is what we need to survive, and we have precious little pity for the golfers and tennis players whose weekend outings are disturbed by a nice, gentle rain. $1-million rains, they call them out here. They also say, more rain, more rest, more babies in the nest. Rain is seen as a blessing in more ways than one on the plains.
Well, I really don't. I don't remember a rainy day since we've been out here.
I remember, what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? And they had one of those old Massey combines. Have you ever seen those? There's no cab on them, and you sit right over that reel.
Yeah.
And doing that, and, you know, that's right off that county road, you know, and all that dust over there. And all you could see was it looked like just a big dust storm going through the field. You couldn't even see who was on it.
Here we measure our weather with precision. It doesn't rain in inches on the plains, or even quarters of an inch. In Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, we measure our rain by the hundredths of an inch.
Hi, George.
As a result of all this uncertainty, there's an inherent quality of hedging when it comes to farming on the plains. A studied avoidance of hubris, a fancy word for pride.
Started out dry this spring, and it's been, well, dry ever since. I don't think we've had a rain now in a month.
I don't think that lesson was ever taught to me more vividly than the time I went to Marv Casperson's place near Dannebrog. Marv and his son Craig were getting ready to haul corn. Obviously, they were on their way to the grain elevator to sell his harvest. Craig was taking the first truckload of Nebraska gold to market. Now, you have to understand that while I consider myself to be a farmer in spirit, I'm not really a farmer. I grow trees. I plant, I water, and I prune with the hope of someday seeing a harvest. But the fact of the matter is, I'm sure not going to base my retirement plans on the bounty of my tree farm. If a drought comes along, which is precisely what happens every 3 or 4 years, or a flood, which occurs every 8 or 10 years, or grasshoppers, or hail, or whatever, I lose half of what I planted, and it really hurts. I invest several weeks of work, a few $100s, and a mountain of emotion into those trees. When they die, a little of me dies too. But when my neighbors, the real farmers, lose their crops, they lose their lives, their farms, their futures, their hopes, their children's hopes. I understand a little of what disaster means to them, but I wondered as I watched Marv and his son on that occasion, ready to harvest for market, what success must feel like. What does it feel like to get past the hail, drought, chinch bugs, wind, grasshoppers, whatever, and win? What's it like when you sold the harvest and the sure sign of victory, the check, is in your hand? I decided that I'd wait around for Marv and his son to come back, and then I could ask them that very question. When I saw them later that afternoon, I posed the question precisely as I've described it to you. When you get past all the trials of Job, what's it like to celebrate the victory of harvest? I'll never forget Marv's answer. He didn't hesitate a second. He said, "I haven't cashed the check yet." But I sputtered, "When you cash the check, what will it feel like to have won?" "I'll have to pull the picker out of the mud hole by the creek without destroying it before I'll know that," Marv said. "But when you get the picker," I tried again. Well, we went on like that until it became obvious that Marv was not about to declare a victory. He'd learned the lesson of the plains. Not only would Marv never declare victory before the harvest, he wouldn't declare victory ever. So don't call rain bad weather, unless you've heard a farmer say that the ground is already too wet. Understand that he's exercising a strategy used by dozens of generations of American farmers before him. Don't count your chickens until they're hatched. In fact, don't count your chickens at all.
Up next on Postcards from Nebraska.
Hours and days, hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars were spent by the city attorney's office and the Office of Public Works to bring the force of city government to bear against this miserable miscreant, Bob Howard, because he could not bring himself to destroy the beauty that grows naturally and usefully in his backyard.
I've never been much for manicured lawns. My front yard is not the sort of thing that barefoot lawn folks find attractive. I always thought that attitude was my own business until a few years ago when it got me into some real trouble.
There's smartweed. Smartweed's good to eat. You can take a look. Yep, the big leafed one, the curly one.
Where his neighbors see weeds, Roger Welch sees lunch.
Field cress. This is field cress, and it tastes just like garlic. And you put a little bit in your salad, and you've got just like a garlic salad. Taste one of the little leaves off the top where they're tender.
I once returned from a short vacation to this former home of mine in Lincoln to find an official notice on the front door that my lawn had been condemned. The yellow card told me that I had 6 days to remove what it called useless vegetation.
What grows in your yard and garden?
Shepherd's purse, field cress, dandelions, dock.
There was chicory. I made coffee out of that. There were ground cherries for jam, lamb's quarter and purslane for salads, poke for greens, sedge for snacks. It turned out that the only useless thing I could find in this lawn was bluegrass, and I certainly hadn't done anything to encourage that. So I invited the weed inspector to come out here and show me what it was that he thought was useless. "What about that white stuff over there?" he snorted. "Clover," I said. "We make tea out of it, and it provides nitrogen for the other plants." "Well," he said tentatively and moving a little further away from me, "what about that stuff?" "Daylilies." "Delicious. Had 'em for supper." He pointed. "Oxalis," I smiled. "Kids love it." The weed inspector left shaking his head, but I wasn't through with crackpots of that sort. I ran for the Lancaster County Weed Control Authority on a pro-weed ticket, and that attracted some national attention.
How's your campaign doing?
Very well, I think. We've probably got more coverage than any other campaign in the entire county. I've been endorsed by Ewell Gibbons, and I think that's a rather formidable endorsement.
Over the next 8 years, I won 2 terms on the county weed board, and with the help of a lot of friends, we turned around the policies at that level of government.
It was a modest but satisfying victory.
But remarkably, sadly, at the Lincoln City Hall, where all of this began so many years ago, not a thing has changed, not a thing has been learned.
You notice the Jerusalem artichokes there on the corner. That seemed to be one of their main concern.
Here at the home of Bob Howard, the weed inspectors have been busy.
I said, well, now, wait a minute. Long as you're here, why don't you point out what it is you're upset with? And we went over each plant that he felt he didn't want, and had to correct him on a watermelon.
What did he identify the watermelon?
I don't remember, no.
During the summer of '88, when drought and economics seemed to recommend that it was time to let the ground heal, the city was insisting that Howard do just like everyone else and grow bluegrass. Bluegrass.
That's what was.
This is where you had your artichokes, and they made you take them out.
And it was from the garage to the fence and over to that apple tree. And we tried planting some grass, and then this is what nature gave me in return in the area.
Berkeley lettuce.
Which is not really my favorite plant.
You'd have been better off with the artichokes.
Oh, yeah.
Hours and days, hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars were spent by the city attorney's office and the Office of Public Works to bring the force of city government to bear against this miserable miscreant, Bob Howard, because he could not bring himself to destroy the beauty that grows naturally and usefully in his backyard.
What is a weed in Lincoln?
Well,
what's the official definition?
When I told the inspector to take it to court,
especially school reunions. And that's not a bad idea. People out here love to get together to renew old ties, exchange stories, laugh, and remember. Remember the years at the old high school.
34, right in the heart of the Depression, you know, we're all sort of pretty poor at the time. And I think that's made us closer knit.
Oh, I do too. The depths of the Depression. Ice cream cones were a nickel. Double dip. Well, you know.
So here we are at the reunion of the Lincoln, Nebraska Jackson High School class of 1934, gathered today, renewing old ties.
Good to see you.
Exchanging stories.
You look good, Eileen. You really do. Well, my heavens, that was 1959.
Laughing. Remembering. And how about your husband? Where's his picture?
Here.
Oh, he's right there on the same page.
Yeah, he had hair too. Curly.
How many of you were graduates of Jackson, class of 34?
Oh, 34, there's 3 of us.
3 of you?
Yeah.
And when was the last time you saw each other?
Oh, last month.
Last month.
Yeah.
Last month?
Yeah.
And when was the last time before that?
Probably a month before that. We get together once a month.
What's going on? Reunions are supposed to bring together widely scattered old friends after a long interval of time. Well, that's sure not what's going on here. So you waited 25 years before you had a reunion.
Yeah, the first year. They don't do that anymore. They have 10 year. We had a 25.
So then when was your next one after 25 years?
69, I believe it was. It was 10 years. And then 78.
Then when did you start meeting every month?
About 3 years? Yeah, about 3 years. We decided we had so much to say we had to get together more often to say it.
What do you suppose the secret was that this class has held together so well?
We felt we needed each other in 1934, and we never got over it. We still need each other. We're a family, that's all. We didn't have TV, we didn't have money to go anyplace, you know. So we made our fun, and we just learned to love each other like brothers and sisters, and it's continued.
Georgia Gay is given credit by her classmates for being the driving force behind the class of 34's reunions.
Emma just called, and they had planned to be here, but Mr. Gakey didn't feel like it this morning when he got up finally. He was 96 years old about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
And
And we're the only two in the class that married each other.
Got married.
The rest of them married somebody outside the class.
That took a while. Why don't you
Yeah,
check?
that took 47 years.
Clark Hansen and his wife Eleanor were classmates at Jackson High, but it wasn't until many years after graduation that they tied the knot.
And my husband had died, and his wife had died, and we just fell in love and got married.
There are some of us in this class that started to kindergarten together. Yeah. So we've known each other for forever.
Did you say you had a favorite teacher that you remembered still?
Well, yes, you know, I didn't know there was a picture of her right here. Ann Munson. She's one of my favorite teachers. And I think she started me on composition things because I went ahead and got my doctorate. But I think she was one of my inspirations.
Did it ever cross your mind when you were a student in that building that you'd be back there?
No, I never thought I would ever be back again. So.
Jackson High is still standing, but it hasn't been used as a high school for 50 years. Do you see yourself running around through those halls
I
too?
sort of do. I remember different things that happened, and you just come back. It's been 57 years, I think, now.
John and June Meehan have returned to Jackson, where they now tutor grade school children in the same halls where John was a student.
I tell them about how it was in 1921 when I started the school, and there's no generation gap. People speak about this generation gap, but when we walk down the hall, they reach out and want to hold our hand or hug us. And
it's remarkable to go back to the very same school that you graduated from. And
I stand there once in a while in the hallway and just look, you know, and I can see, like it was yesterday, that we were in there running up and down these steps.
how many people were in the graduating class originally?
78.
And how many are there left now? Does anyone keep count?
We have about 50. And I think that the older we get, the more we feel this need for closeness and the fact that we have each other and we hang on as long as we can, you know. The pictures I showed over there a while ago, it's amazing how many, when you start to count, how many have died within the last 7 years. So we've got to hang on to each other.
When you can't get your breath, you can't do that.
Don't you mind? Bye-bye. Was this great? Oh, it was so terrific.
Up next on Postcards from Nebraska.
Have you given much thought to how you're going to deal with the economic impact of the strike?
What strike?
The strike. What do you mean, what strike?
I didn't know there was one. What
strike? What strike?
Strike? Who's having a strike?
Well, the Major League Baseball team, ball players would get signing bonuses for more than most people make in a lifetime, and are out on strike. That's ridiculous.
One of the results of satellite dishes like this and cable television is that even those of us who live in rural America are no longer outside the mainstream of current events. For example, just the other day, in my living room, I was watching television and I heard the President and members of Congress tell us about the impending national disaster of the baseball strike and how ripples would spread out across the country so that sooner or later, all of us would feel that strike's effects. Now, I know that there are a lot of little people who are going to be hurt, the peanut vendors and the ticket takers, but I wondered how it was going to affect the rest of us. So I just drove on up to town and asked a few people what they thought.
Have you given much thought to how you're going to deal with the economic impact of the strike?
What strike?
The strike. What do you mean, what strike?
I didn't know there was one. What strike?
Strike? What strike?
Strike? Who's having a strike?
Well, the Major League Baseball team, certainly. Gaylord Mickelson runs the Little Mermaid, our town gift shop. What percentage would you say you're going to lose your business this summer because of the strike?
1.5%, maybe. Half of 1%, 0.005%.
I don't get the impression you spent a lot of time thinking about this.
No, I didn't.
Dannebrog, population 320, is at the precise center of the country. If you're going to go anywhere in America, some town booster or another once said, there's a good chance you'll be coming through Dannebrog. Heading to spring training or taking to the highways to reach a game, you might very well come down Dannebrog's main drag. Dannebrog's pretty much on the way to everywhere, wouldn't you say?
I'd say, yep.
So what effect do you think on your business the strike is going to have?
What strike?
Well, you know, the big strike that everybody's talking about.
Baseball?
Yeah.
I heard about that, yeah.
Harriet Nielsen operates the town's cafe.
I don't care about the players, and I don't care about the managers and all that, but I think the vendors, I'm more interested in the people making money with food and hot dogs and things like that. It's not right for them.
What percentage do you suppose the people who come in here and get gas and repairs are on their way to a big league game?
Not very many.
L. Schmidt is proprietor of our town service station.
I wish they'd get their stuff figured out, because it's hurting a lot of people that make a lot less money than those guys do. A lot of small vendors and people, and just the fans that would like to see the games.
Do you think fans would pay to see replacement players?
I bet they would. And maybe if there wasn't so high-priced salaries, maybe even some of those ticket prices would go down.
It's not all that long till spring, you know, so I thought I'd come down here to the Dannebrog ballpark and see if maybe there weren't some guys playing catch or hitting a few fungos, dreaming of trying out for those replacement slots. But it's still pretty quiet. Have you thought about coming out of retirement, and since they're going to be looking for replacement players?
Yeah, I'll be ready tomorrow.
I think there's a bus coming through here picking up players.
Anybody making $1 million really should be happy with that.
Tom Schroeder runs the town's bakery. Would you like to see Congress jump in and straighten this thing out?
No, I think they ought to leave it between the labor and the management.
Yeah, feel sorry for the owners because they're paying them too much to start with, and I guess you can't blame the players. They can get all they can while they're there, but I think it's just way too much money.
Kenny Lauritsen is a farmer and pork producer just outside of town. Have you heard much talk in Dannebrog about the strike?
No, we don't talk much about that at all.
And you got ball players that get signing bonuses for more than most people make in a lifetime, and they're out on strike. That's ridiculous.
Eric Nielsen runs the town tavern.
You know, I meant the world goes on. We didn't have a World Series. We were all pretty depressed about that around here. But it's a little hard to feel sorry for the owners and the players and the lawyers associated with it.
You know, the longer the strike goes on, I think the less and less people are going to care about it, and maybe the fans will go on strike.
You bring up a bunch of minor league players, and in 2 years, 3 years, who's going to know the difference? The game will go on.
I hope it gets settled, though. Then we can start concentrating on more important things.
Like what?
The O.J. Simpson trial.
Well, there you have it. Our little survey of downtown Dannebrog, accurate to plus or minus 3%. There are a lot of baseball fans in this town, but the fact of the matter is, these days, what they're concerned about is what's on the menu at Harriet's Cafe, or how the cookie supply is holding up at Schroeder's Bakery.
When Postcards from Nebraska returns,
They're good, solid American-made tools, but better than that, they're good, solid Nebraska-made tools. Manufactured right here in this little town of DeWitt, invented right here by a Danish immigrant blacksmith back when Calvin Coolidge was president. It's not surprising, I suppose, that my farm shop in Dannebrog, where I work on old tractors, is dominated by fairly common tools, old standards like wrenches and hammers, a few less common devices like valve spring compressors and pullers. All mechanics are familiar with tools like that. What may be surprising to a lot of people, however, even mechanics, is the increasing prevalence of this peculiar mutant form of the ordinary pliers, the locking Vise-Grip pliers. Vise-Grips don't just grip, they clamp down. In my shop, I have long-nose Vise-Grips, round jaw, square jaw. There are 40 varieties in all. I even carry some in my pickup truck for whatever emergencies come along on the road or around the farm. They're good, solid American-made tools, but better than that, they're good, solid Nebraska-made tools. Manufactured right here in this little town of DeWitt, invented right here by a Danish immigrant blacksmith back when Calvin Coolidge was president.
This building right here was his original blacksmith shop. That's the exterior of it. This is an interior shot of the early factory dating from, I would guess probably 1925 or 6. That's Grandpa Peterson there. Grandpa came here in 1901 from Denmark with empty pockets but a head full of ideas.
Bill Peterson started the company. Grandson Ellen Peterson runs the business today.
Each of these pieces is put together with a rivet. This was one of the first jobs I had in this factory, was putting a little roll pin in this hole here to attach the lever to the easy release trigger. I think I made about 80 cents an hour.
Ellen Peterson remembers the day his grandfather acknowledged his manhood.
He decided one day when he'd figured out I'd grown up, when I was 16 years old, he took me over here to the local beer joint and he sat me down on a hot summer afternoon and he said to the bartender, "We want 2 cold beers and 2 good cigars."
You had made the grade.
I made the grade. I passed his test.
This single factory in this little town is responsible for the entire output of millions of Vise-Grip pliers per year that reach every end of the earth.
No matter how carefully all these parts are made, you need a guy who knows what he's doing to pound around on it with a hammer, and he can feel when he locks it under if it's just exactly right.
Now these are good tools, but they have one fault. They aren't always used the way the manufacturer may have intended, even on the assembly line.
All over this factory, you'll see Vise-Grip pliers that's been temporarily attached to some stationary object so that it can be used for some other purpose.
Temporarily 20 years ago.
Probably. It looks about 20 years old.
It doesn't bother you then that I used them to repair my toilet and they're still in there 20 years later?
I love it. We don't have any.
In my own home in Dannebrog, I put down a pair of long noses on the kitchen table, and the next time I need them, they're gone. I find them somewhere else. On the yard gate, on the washing machine, on the microwave, on the hot tub. I've complained about this problem to the Vise-Grip people. They told me they have problems of their own.
We don't have any hard statistical evidence, but we have anecdotal evidence that probably most of the Vise-Grip tools in use at this second around the world are in use as some kind of a temporary handle or a clamp or a holding device, and not in fact being used as a pliers or a wrench or a wire cutter.
So they're really more coat hangers than tools.
Well, they can be both.
I can't help but wonder if in 1,000 towns scattered across the plains, there aren't other blacksmiths like Bill Peterson, or mechanics or farmers working on ingenious tools and devices that'll make our lives a little easier.
Still to come on Postcards from Nebraska.
Last spring, the sun set somewhere over there. Last week, it set way over here. Every year in a regular cycle. I think even if it took 12 years instead of 12 months for that rotation, we human beings would devise some period of time like a year, because it's such a marvelous balance between too long and too short, a scant border between memory and forgetfulness. Time's a funny thing. For some, a decade is just a snap of the fingers, while for others it seems to go on forever. I was walking by this Apollo spacecraft on display on the University of Nebraska campus a few years ago, and I saw two little boys looking inside those plastic windows. The one said, "Boy, there sure isn't much room inside that thing, is there?" And the other one answered, "No, that's one of those old-fashioned space capsules where you couldn't get up and move around." An old-fashioned space capsule. What was for me just a moment in history was for those little guys something from the dark and mysterious past. You know, back before television, when people still rode around on horseback. You know, before hula hoops were invented. Every New Year's Eve, I climb up this hill behind my farm just outside of Dannebrog. From here, I have a view of the river and the bridge. At dusk, I can barely see Bolus and Caro over there. From here, I can hear the coyotes and the ice cracking down on the river. Those are the things that always stay the same, year after year, century after century. I planted this tree about 10 years ago, when it was only about a foot high. I planted this tree about 10 years ago, too. Obviously, this tree didn't take the decade very seriously. A few years ago, I set up these fence posts as a kind of Nebraska Stonehenge. Last spring, the sun set somewhere over there. Last week, it set way over here. Every year in a regular cycle. I think even if it took 12 years instead of 12 months for that rotation, we human beings would devise some period of time like a year, because it's such a marvelous balance between too long and too short, a scant border between memory and forgetfulness. On my annual New Year's visit up here, I like to recall what's happened since the last New Year's Eve, things I couldn't have predicted in my wildest imaginings, things I might have predicted if I'd thought about them. What will happen in the next 10 years? Same as the last. Things beyond our imaginings, things we should have seen coming. The problem is, we don't know which things will be as we expected and what will come along quite by surprise. We know one thing for sure. The next decade will be too short and too long. It'll simultaneously give us too much time and too little. Jim Taylor, a Texas friend of mine, makes gumbo. He says a batch of his gumbo will feed 30 or 300 people. He says that if they like gumbo, one batch will just feed 30. On the other hand, if they don't like it, one batch is more than enough for 300. I think the next year, the next decade, is going to be a lot like Jim Taylor's gumbo. If things go well, it'll be over far too soon. And we'll hear little children talking about the good old days 10 years ago when you could buy a brand new car for only $15,000. Back before Michael Jackson was a family man. You know, back when there were elephants. On the other hand, if the years of the 90s are not so good, well, there'll be plenty of gumbo for everyone.